Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I'm the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. We are the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. And for those of you who've been following us this month, we are focusing on social enterprise. And when I say social enterprise, we know that by definition, nonprofits are social enterprises, but we wanted to take a deeper dive and look at ways that social enterprises, nonprofits rather, can actually go beyond grants and create products, services, and even entities that will generate revenue beyond the grant. All right, so as you may have known, we have shown you how to actually develop your concept, research your ideas. We have shared with you tips for pitching and all of that good stuff. We even had Mark Lane on talking about legal structures. Today, we're going to talk about how you can actually grow your social enterprise and share some resources with you. All right, and our guest today is Wil Colgrove. He is the director of the Rustandy Center for Social Sector Innovation. And before we get started, Wil, can you come to us and you know come to us in your own way? Give us a little background as to how you started in social enterprise, and then we'll talk about some of the resources.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, and good morning, everyone. So as Valerie said, my name is Wil Colgrove. I'm the director of the Edwardson Social Entrepreneurship Program at the Rustandy Center. It's a lot of words, but we'll get into all those programs in a bit. A bit about myself. I've been with the university for about 3.5 years, and really we sit within the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, which is the business school at the University of Chicago, but much of our social entrepreneurship programs cut across the entire university and into the broader Chicago ecosystem, which we'll talk a bit about. Before I came to the Rustandy Center, I was working most recently as an early stage venture capitalist here in Chicago, in a firm that was focused on investing in companies at the intersection of government and technology. So specifically working in regulated markets that were either selling into cities or had a lot of interface with city regulators. And I came to that because my prior career was working in government. I spent a number of years in New York City, working in the city government there. I did everything from sort of municipal grant making and municipal finance on the city budget to writing legislation to try to create social change through legislators. And frankly, I grew a bit frustrated with the way that government picked winners and losers, both from a funding and from a legislative perspective, which is what led me to venture capital, thinking that surely the private markets must be better at this than others. I think it's a mixed bag on whether or not that's really true, but what I've learned is that this sort of a niche intersection of social entrepreneurship and impact investing, to me, is a really interesting third way to explore sort of leveraging the best of private markets and private business with a real interest for social change. And that's what I'm fortunate to do at the Rustandy Center. So just a bit about the center. We are what's known as a research center, again, located at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. We call ourselves the Social Impact Hub at the Booth School of Business, but really, as I said, a lot of our programming cuts across, particularly graduate students across the University of Chicago. Our sort of three primary stakeholders as a center are University of Chicago students, alumni, and faculty. But we also do a number of programs to reach the broader community, again, particularly located in the 9 neighborhoods surrounding Hyde Park, where our main campus is.
Mhm.
And sort of the way that we do that is we offer what we call hands-on learning opportunities. And that's everything from coursework for students through lab-based courses to research, with the goal of providing sort of people and practices with the potential to solve the world's biggest problems. And really, anyone committed to making a world more equitable and sustainable, we think of as our primary audience for the center, and try to reach folks who are, again, trying to explore the innovations that can make the world a better place.
Oh, that's interesting. So you and I have something else in common. You used to work for the city of New York, so did I. I worked in the Dinkins administration and finance. So
Okay. I worked for so my former boss, Gail Brewer, was the Manhattan Borough president, and one of her first jobs in city government was in the Dinkins administration. And I was fortunate to take a class with Mayor Dinkins at Columbia for grad school, and it was one of the most interesting courses I had the pleasure of taking. So He was a great man.
He was. He was. Alrighty. So, can you share a little bit about how the Rustandy Center is related to the Polsky Center?
Sure. Yeah. So particularly folks who may have explored programming at the Polsky Exchange building on 53rd Street are probably familiar with the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. That's the university's sort of flagship entrepreneurship and innovation center, as the name suggests.
Mhm.
But they function similar to the Rustandy Center in that they are, again, sort of an experiential learning hub at the university. They cut across sort of, again, more traditional entrepreneurship, small business growth, venture capital, private equity, whereas where the Rustandy Center plays is really more squarely in this social impact domain. And those are really so there's two areas that I oversee personally, which is our social entrepreneurship and impact investing programs. So launching either nonprofit or for-profit social enterprises and or learning how to invest in those businesses.
Mhm.
We also run a number of programs on more traditional philanthropy, nonprofit governance, sort of building and scaling nonprofits, which are a little bit separate from Polsky, but we work very closely with them. We actually share an office suite with them at the Harper Center, which is our main building for the business school down in Hyde Park. We're on the same floor. We have a shared kitchen. We work right next to each other. And particularly on the social entrepreneurship side, I work very closely with the Polsky team on the New Venture Challenge program. We run a track called the Social New Venture Challenge program, for example. The Polsky Accelerator program in the summer, which is sort of one of our summer launch programs for students looking to grow their own social ventures. I work very closely with the team on that. So there's quite a bit of overlap, but we sort of try to stay in our relative lanes when it comes to social innovation on our side and more traditional entrepreneurship innovation on the Polsky Center side.
Yeah, so I'm really curious, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but when you work with nonprofits and help them start, what are some of the things that you do? I'd be curious to know what a business person's approach to helping folks start nonprofits versus, I guess the traditional way of starting nonprofits.
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, taking a step back, the way that we define social entrepreneurship at the center is actually sort of tax status agnostic. And what we mean by that is that whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, the
Mhm.
core operations you're trying to achieve are quite similar, right? Your funding
Mhm.
sources are going to be different. Your organizational structure is going to be different, but we are agnostic when it comes to sort of the three letters at the end of your name, right? Whether it's org or C corp or whatever it may be. And so really what we focus on as a center, where we want to engage with entrepreneurs, is if they're trying to launch a business, and again, business can be nonprofit or for-profit, an enterprise that is trying to solve both a social problem and
Mhm.
generate some sustainable profit. Whatever sustainability that might take could be in the form of philanthropy and potentially some earned revenue. For a for-profit business, that's obviously going to come in the form of selling a product or service, but ideally while still achieving some social outcome. And so the sort of steps we take in building a business model for both of those entities are actually surprisingly similar. There's just some of the sort of inputs are going to be different in terms of, again, where your funding is coming from, et cetera. But we think that actually a lot of the core skills in building and launching a business are the same, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit. I like to joke that social entrepreneurship is just harder entrepreneurship. You're both trying to, run a business and do something positive in the world,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit, those challenges are kind of the same. So what do we do if you come to me and say, hey,
Mhm.
I'm looking to start a business solving problem X?
Mhm.
How do I do that?
Yeah.
Essentially, what we do is provide three things. Mentoring, so again, connecting, trying to provide advice, sounding board, et cetera. Coaching, where we're connecting with people smarter than me who actually understand the unique problem or domain you're trying to work in. And then
Mhm.
also we provide funding to people to actually get their entities off the ground. And really for us as a center, as I said, our primary stakeholders are students and alumni. And
Mhm.
so one of our sort of capstone programs in the social entrepreneurship world is a program called the John Edwardson Social New Venture Challenge.
Mhm.
And that is run as a business accelerator. We actually just announced the 20 student ventures are going to be taking part in our classroom portion of that competition this year. And so we have essentially a quarter-long program where the students are building a business model, building a pitch deck, and we bring in a cycle of external judges who are providing mentorship and feedback on how they can take that business to the next level. And then at the end of that program, we award about $150,000 in seed funding to student ventures to actually go and run their enterprises, either post-graduation or in the summer between their first and second year, depending on their program. And so that's sort of what we do is we help them with ideation, we help them with building a business model, and then ideally we help them with launching and scaling their enterprise.
Okay, that's awesome. And then can you tell us more about the Edwardson Social Entrepreneurship Program?
Yeah, so again, that is sort of the program that I oversee. We're very fortunate to have the support of a number of donors, including John Edwardson, who's an amazing philanthropist in Chicago, former CEO of CDW. And anyway, he's been a fantastic supporter of the Rustandy Center since our founding about 12 years ago. But essentially what we do is, again, we have a whole host of sort of hands-on learning opportunities for students who want to start their own social venture. Everything sort of ladders up to that Social New Venture Challenge competition. But in the interim, we run a number of programs, courses that help students sort of figure out what problem they actually want to solve. We have coursework in, again, sort of identifying ideation, like what we call customer discovery, which is like, I care about gun violence prevention in Chicago, but I don't quite know what the solution for it is. How might I develop a solution around that? And so we try to provide some sort of resources to help folks start to really think about problems in a more holistic way. And then it's really about, again, just sort of team building, connecting with other students across the university, which is an important piece of it too, right? We see that particularly a lot of graduate students tend to be fairly siloed. Most of their friends and colleagues are folks in their program, whether it's the business school or the policy school. And we find that the best innovations often come from those sort of multidisciplinary teams. And so we do a lot of programming around team building, which is connecting students from the business school with folks at the law school or the med school or the policy school, the School of Social Work, to really bring those diverse experiences and expertise to bear. And we think that that's where sort of the most interesting solutions often come about. And so do a number of programs and events, again, speaker series, bringing in experts to educate students on what's happening in the field. We have a fantastic roster of what we call entrepreneurs and experts in residence, who are practitioners in the field of social entrepreneurship, nonprofit leadership, et cetera, and who again act as sort of guides and mentors to the students as they're exploring problems.
Okay, so do you guys? I know that Polsky, interacts, pretty well with the community in terms of a lot of their programming. What are some of the opportunities that Rustandy has for folks in the community?
Yeah, so again, I think one, when the Polsky Exchange was still operating on the physical co-working space, we would do a lot of programming there. And I still hold monthly virtual office hours for any member of the community through the Polsky Exchange mentorship program. So that's one way I, again, do monthly calls, primarily with nonprofits and sort of small business leaders who are looking to fund or start a social enterprise. So that's one way that you can certainly engage with me. The other sort of side of our programming team, as I said, is focused on sort of more traditional nonprofit and philanthropy type work. And so we have a number of programs there that really are more community facing. One is that we offer this something called the Nonprofit Board Toolkit, which is really aimed at sort of capacity development for local nonprofits. And I think Valerie has a link she'll share to that toolkit. But that's really a way that we try to help local nonprofits grow and scale their enterprises. One other thing that we do as a school, sort of our best resources are our students and alumni. And so we run a number of programs that are aimed at matching Booth alumni and even current students with local nonprofits to join their boards. One way we do that is through a program called Alumni Board Connect. And we run an annual program where nonprofits who are seeking board members sort of send us their information. And we have alumni who are looking to join boards send us their information as well. And we run a pretty comprehensive matching program with local community organizations, which is one great way to get involved. Another program we run on an annual basis is a conference called Onboard. And that's an annual event sort of exploring key trends and insights in the social sector broadly. But really, there's two goals of that program, as in most of our sort of nonprofit and philanthropy work. One is capacity development for local nonprofits, and two is matching, again, local alumni with nonprofits in the community. And so we have alumni there who are looking to join boards, learning more about board governance, and we have nonprofit leaders there who are looking to both connect with alumni and other folks in the community, and also sort of learn how to scale and build their nonprofits. So this year, that on-board conference will be held on April 29th. And if you look at the Rustandy Center website, you can find more information about the conference, and we'll also share some more materials there. But really, that's, a series of information sessions, a nonprofit networking fair, really just a great place to connect with fellow business and nonprofit leaders and hear from some experts in the social sector who are sort of part of our broader community at the center. So those are sort of our big sort of capstone programs. But increasingly, we're hearing that not only is there growing interest from the community to engage with the university, but there's really growing interest from UChicago students to do more work in the local neighborhoods. And so one way we decided to try to solve for that is we launched a new program last year called the Rustandy Challenge. And what that's sort of aimed at is we bring groups of MBA students together to partner with local nonprofits on some key strategy issues that they're solving for. And so for the first year, we were working with the South Shore Chamber of Commerce, working with students. They're looking to revitalize a program they run called the Artisan Collective, which is a retail space for artists creating clothing, jewelry, other sort of handmade goods, and really devising what that space should look like, what their business plan should be, et cetera. And we are in the process of running that program right now with South Shore Chamber of Commerce, and we'll hopefully run further iterations of that Rustandy Challenge in the future. And again, that's a great way that we can sort of bring business students to engage with local organizations.
Big question for you. I know you got another example, but how might nonprofits get involved? What do they need to do in order to get help through, say, the challenge or other programs?
Yeah, so for the Rustandy Challenge, we will be, as I said, we're right now engaging with the South Shore Chamber, and it's a sort of a single client for the time being. We'll probably be sort of soliciting new interest in the summer for other organizations who might want to get involved in the future. But for programs like Onboard or the Nonprofit Board Toolkit, and you can sort of find information on how to get involved on our website, or just join us at the conference on April 29th. I'll also just share, if you just reach out to us on our website, there's a sort of general Rustandy Center inbox, and I'll connect you with my colleagues who run those programs to connect with any nonprofits. So yeah, those are some of the ways to get involved. The other thing I would just say, again, we mentioned the Polsky Center, a center we work very closely with. They run a number of fantastic programs for local small businesses, not just sort of the mentorship program in affiliation with the exchange, but also Polsky runs something called the Small Business Growth Program, where local small businesses can apply and again be matched to University of Chicago students to help them with sort of strategy or other projects they're working on. And they also run a video series called Entrepreneurship Essentials, which is a really fantastic set of resources on sort of helping small businesses, particularly those who are just starting, whether a for-profit or nonprofit, with some of the key operational challenges of incorporation, getting your accounting set up, hiring your first employees, all of the fun stuff of actually running a business. And so those are all great resources.
Question for you about the video series. Do you have a YouTube channel where these are archived?
Yep, it is a YouTube channel. So that's run by Polsky. So I don't have the link handy, but I can definitely share those. But if you just Google Polsky Entrepreneurship Essentials, you should be able to find it. Okay. And I can definitely share a link as well after this.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
And the other group too that I just want to mention is the university's Office of Civic Engagement, which is the entity at the university that is most closely sort of mission aligned with local organizations. And they run, again, a whole host of programs on engaging with particularly community nonprofits. They run a program called the Community Programs Accelerator, for example, which is an accelerator program for local nonprofit organizations. And we work closely with them on a number of areas, including sort of exploring impact investing. The university has a long history of investing in the community. Also has, of course, a number of history of issues with engagement in the community. But I think that the sort of current team at the Office of Civic Engagement and the university's new president are very serious about sort of improving university community relations. And the Office of Civic Engagement is really our tip of the spear, so to speak, when it comes to really being out there and engaging in the community. And they do a ton of great work.
Okay. And going back to the fact that you also help find board members, is there an application process for people to get the board members, and then also is there some sort of accountability, for lack of a better word? Does the organization get a chance to assess how well the relationship is going and all of that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is an application process for organizations, and there's an application process for alumni. And essentially, what we do is we say, Valerie, here are three potential board members who we think might be a fit because of their interest in the domains you're working on. And then it really is up to the nonprofit to then engage with those people and figure out if there actually is a fit. The application for the next cycle will be we sort of run that starting in the summer. I find that tends to be a good time for nonprofits to run a program like this. So every summer we open applications for a new cycle. And again, I can share that link, but if you just look on the Rustandy Center website for Alumni Board Connect, you'll see a link to the page, and when that application goes live, it will be on there. But yeah, that's one of the sort of reasons why we exist, is to both facilitate those connections and run check-ins to ensure that the relationships are actually solid. Again, joining a board is a serious commitment, and we want to make sure that people are aware of what they're getting into, and again, that sort of all sides are aligned, which is one of the other reasons we run programs like Onboard, is to make sure that both sides are going in with clear eyes about what a board member organization relationship looks like, and understanding what's expected of board members from the nonprofit side and vice versa. So it is a big commitment, and one we take very seriously.
Yeah, so you also have the Stephen Tarson Impact Investment Fund, and that's
Yeah, so that's the other sort of hat I wear at the university. We've talked a lot about social entrepreneurship, but it's really about, again, particularly graduate students, and to a smaller extent, faculty and community organizations who are looking to start their own new businesses. But the other side of the coin is training the next generation of folks who are going to invest in those social enterprises down the road, and that sort of falls into our impact investing bucket. And so similar to our social entrepreneurship program, we run a number of experiential learning opportunities for students to learn how to be impact investors. And that really means investing for both financial and social returns. So primarily that's going to be in for-profit businesses, but ones that are trying to create some environmental or social outcomes as well to whatever their core business operations are. And what we've heard from students over the years, traditionally, a lot of our programming in that space was sort of more theoretical, or was in like a competition format. Students would sort of play mock investor and recommend an investment without any real dollars behind it. And that's frustrating for the students, and that's frustrating for the entrepreneurs who are spending time engaging with students with perhaps some outside chance of funding if they win a national competition with 50 business schools, right? And so we see tremendous need for what we call sort of early stage catalytic capital in social impact ventures nationally, and also here in Chicago and the broader Midwest. And so we decided to try to solve for that. And so it's an interesting story, actually. The idea for the Stephen Tarson Impact Investment Fund actually first came out of a class at Booth. We ran an impact investing course that a few years ago was what we call one of our lab-based courses. And what that looks like is there are clients for the class who come together and work on a specific project. And in this case, one of the clients for the class was us, the Rustandy Center. And we asked a team of students to explore whether a student-managed fund could exist at the university and what the structure might look like. And that actually ended up yielding a ton of benefits. We've got a great series of research on what's been done at other schools across the country. And with that, we went out and started talking to donors to see if anyone would be willing to support that. And we found a fantastic donor in Ron Tarson, who's been an amazing supporter of the university and the Rustandy Center for a number of years, who said, I love this idea. I want to see students and the university put its money where its mouth is when it comes to supporting local social enterprises. And
Mm-hmm.
so with that, we were able to raise $1 million for this fund, which is named in
Wow.
honor of Ron's brother, Stephen Tarson, for students to, again, directly run a sourcing and diligence process to invest in local early stage businesses. So we're looking to invest $50,000 to $100,000 per deal in local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not just local. Our first investment actually from the fund was just closed in November of last year. And it's in a company
Oh,
actually out of
excellent.
California, but it's a early stage technology company that's working on more efficient heating and cooling systems, which saves a
Mm-hmm.
ton of money for homeowners and significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions. A company called Harvest Thermal. So essentially what that program looks like is we have a group of Booth students, 60 in total right now, who are actively looking out, sourcing companies who are currently raising funding.
Mm-hmm.
And if we find one that fits sort of the impact thesis of the students, then we will look to
Mm-hmm.
directly invest in those businesses. And so actively scouting opportunities. So if you're an early stage social enterprise looking to raise, about $1 to $1.5 million, we'd love to talk and see if the Tarson Fund might be a fit for you. Again,
Mm-hmm.
if you Google Stephen Tarson Impact Investment Fund, you can find more information about that program. And actively looking for opportunities there.
Okay, so once you invest, are are you doing a little technical assistance helping the folks, actually launch so that you're protecting your investment, or do they just take the money and go?
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. They don't take the money and run. So as I said, we just made our first investment. But again, that's that's the greatest resource we have as a university, and frankly, why anyone would want to take our money is because we do have the sort of resources of the university behind us, and so we're actively engaging with our first investment on ways that our students and the university itself can support the organization, and that's certainly our hope is that we can help them on strategy, we can help them on business modeling, et cetera, other exercises that business school students are good at and have the time and capacity for that a small scrappy startup might not have all the resources to do everything at once. And so we think that's one of the great ways that we can help social enterprises is with the sort of human capital at the university.
Awesome.
And yeah, that's our hope. That can be our value add.
That's a lot of value when you look at the University of Chicago. Awesome. Awesome. All right. So, to our listening audience, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post in comments, and we can share those questions, publicly and answer for everybody. So, looks like we have a comment. Okay, your program offerings are fantastic. Does the Rustandy Center have any graduate students volunteering with K to 12 service learning programs? And James is one of our members.
Yeah, so
Oh,
it's a
no,
great question,
sorry,
James.
he's not. No, I'm sorry, this isn't one of our members. I got him confused with someone else, but thank you anyway, James.
But yes, we do have a number of students volunteering with, I would say, both volunteering. We also run a sort of junior board matching program for current Booth students to work with local nonprofits in a junior board member capacity while they're in school. That's a sort of a year-long commitment that local nonprofits they get matched with 1 to 2 students who are then working with them throughout the year. And we've definitely had a number of service learning programs engage with that opportunity. We also, what we try to do, particularly for students who have ideas in the, for example, sort of education technology space, education domain, and that are looking to go through something like our social and venture challenge, is that we try to connect them with local organizations who are already doing this work on the ground so that they can sort of learn from one another and potentially test the interventions that the students are exploring, et cetera. And so there's a number of ways that sort of students engage with the community. Again, some of those are through some of our more formal programs. Some of those are just sort of us connecting students that we know of interest in these areas with organizations in our orbit. But yeah, there's definitely connections there.
All right. Thank you so much. And James is a member. I'm used to seeing his name another way. So I'm sorry for the confusion. Thank you. All righty. Now, that brings to me another question. Do you guys, I guess, interact with folks, I guess, around the country, for other things other than your investments? So if people have advice, they want advice and they're living in another country or another section of the country, is that possible?
Yeah, so it depends. Again, sort of our core stakeholders as a center really are focused on students and alumni and faculty of the university, and then sort of local organizations who are engaging with one of our other programs at the university. So if there's no sort of nexus to the university, it's perhaps not necessarily a natural fit. But one of the ways we engage with local organizations, again, programs like Onboard are, we actually run that. So the university has not just a campus in Chicago, but also campuses and a presence in Hong Kong and London. And we actually run a version of the Onboard conference in those areas. So in Hong Kong and London, focused on the Asia and European markets. And so that's one way where we do a lot of work with organizations globally. And in particular, our Hong Kong program is really focused on sort of nonprofit support and capacity development for local organizations in Hong Kong and Asia more generally. For the broader parts of the US, we run some smaller versions of engagements in New York, San Francisco, other sort of geographies across the US. But those are, again, with COVID, a lot of those travel engagements were sort of put on hold for a bit. But that's another reason why we think projects like the Nonprofit Board Toolkit are so fantastic, because it's intended to be a resource that sort of anyone can pick up and use at their own pace and time. And that's something that's certainly accessible to anyone in the country or the world who's exploring some of these questions of starting a nonprofit. On the social entrepreneurship side, again, we certainly engage with like judges and mentors and experts from across the globe and the country. And we have students who are coming from all over the globe who are working on social ventures. And so as they then become alumni of our program, we have this fantastic network of folks all across the world who are working on social ventures, and we still run sort of check-ins and programs with them. So that's a natural fit if they happen to have a connection with one of our former programs. The other places, again, just through the mentorship that we do in partnership with Polsky. As I said, I run a sort of monthly mentorship offering. And my last call, I spoke with someone in Seattle, someone in India, someone in Milwaukee, and someone in New York. So no one even from Chicago. So people can certainly find us through those programs. And again, if you're working on a social venture or any of these other sort of programs that we talked about that the Rustandy Center offers, would certainly love to chat with you and see if there's a fit.
Hey, John, it's great to see you. John asked, I'm a for-profit business with a lot of experience in community work. I'm looking to start a social enterprise. Your advice on how to get involved with your offerings?
Sure. So first of all, I think one is just sort of set up a mentorship meeting with me, and I'd love to learn a bit more about what you're working on. And again, there's sort of a couple of ways you could theoretically be involved. One would be sort of connections with students who are working on something similar to see if there's a fit there. If it's a for-profit business, probably wouldn't be a fit for something like Board Connect, but perhaps could be a fit for something like the Small Business Growth Program or one of the other programs that Polsky runs. So it kind of depends on exactly where you are in the process. As a starting point, I would recommend setting up a mentorship meeting with myself or one of the other fantastic mentors through the Polsky Exchange. And then two is exploring something like the Entrepreneurship Essentials program that I mentioned. I think could be a great place to start. And then potentially there's a fit for something more hands-on, which could be something more targeted like the Rustandy Challenge potentially in the future, or other ways to just get involved with students who are looking to engage in whatever domain you're working on.
Okay, awesome. So that brings me to the next question, I guess, just more generally, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are starting, and especially if they're trying to operate in a social space?
Yeah, so I think we talked a little bit before we went live, but sort of organizationally as a center, we are sort of business model agnostic when it comes to our definition of social entrepreneurship. And what we mean by that is, we don't care if you're organized as a 501c3 or a C Corp or a B Corp or an LLC. We're interested in engaging with folks who are looking to solve both a social problem in the world and generate some sort of sustainable business. definition of sustainable for a nonprofit might look different than it is for a for-profit business, but sort of the core operations are the same, right? You're solving a problem that people have a willingness to support, and their support for that could be in the form of philanthropy, or it could be in the form of paying for a product or service. But sort of identifying that pain point and being laser focused on solving for it, while not just reducing negative externalities of the business, but ideally sort of purposely, intentionally solving for some social ill, is really the goal. And so what we tend to do with all of our social entrepreneurs is just really help them walk through that problem identification process and make sure that whatever thing it is that they see as being an issue in the world really is something that other people feel as an acute pain point, and helping them figure out. We talk a lot as a center, particularly in the social entrepreneurship space, about customers, users, and beneficiaries. And for a social enterprise, right, your customers might be the people who are paying for your product or service, might not actually be your end beneficiary, right? We can imagine a scenario where we're doing work for building, housing for the homeless, where the people paying for that aren't actually the end recipients of that, but your beneficiaries are different. A lot of times we see in the social enterprise world this sort of sliding scale model where certain people are paying more for products or services that are subsidizing support for others. And so this blending of customer, users, beneficiaries is often more complicated than it might be for a traditional for-profit business. And so we spend a lot of time sort of working with people on identifying who all those stakeholders are. And then the next just sort of general piece of advice I always have is just talk to humans. It sounds so simple, but you'd be shocked at how many people sort of get heads down on building something without actually like picking their heads up and talking to those they're trying to build it for or offer a product or service for. And so, we call this sort of in the academic parlance customer discovery, but that's all it is just talking to people and sort of testing your hypotheses. And everyone goes into the world, into their business with biases, right?
Right.
And so it's really important to actually go out and talk to people who may have a different perspective and figure out if, the thing that you think is a problem is really something that I, as a potential customer, user, beneficiary, agree. And it's really figuring out that very acute singular pain point and starting your business around that, nailing that piece of it. And then eventually you can try to expand into something broader. But that's really the most important thing, and where we see a lot of organizations struggle is they have this sort of broad sense of problems in the world, but they're not really solving for a very discrete thing. And if you're not doing that, you're never going to make it. So really, it's really about focus, I think.
Yeah. So what are some of the biggest, biggest mistakes? We already touched on one, but what other mistakes do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an offshoot of that. It's sort of trying to be all things to all people, particularly in the early stages when people are talking to, potential, especially I think we see this in the sort of software-based solutions market, where I have a software solution that's going to help an organization with bookkeeping, let's say, and they start working on building a product for that. And then the organization says, we could also really use help with compliance or hiring or some of these other things. And the startups try to sort of do all of these things for this organization who has a ton of needs, but that's not really their expertise as an entity. And so you get sort of this mission creep problem where you're trying to do all of these things for a single client, and that's often not replicable. Then you say, okay, we built a product solution for Valerie's organization, but then when we go to talk to John's organization, he wants 5 other things. And as a small business, again, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, you simply can't be everything to everyone. So that's really where it's important to focus on sort of your core mission and making sure you can deliver on that, which again, hopefully is an acute pain point. The other just general piece of advice I often give is that people are very focused on ideas, particularly the graduate students we work with. They're super, they have this very unique idea, and they think the idea is going to be the thing that wins the day, and they have first mover advantage. They're the first one to do this, and that's why they're going to win. And that's almost never the case. Really, success in the social entrepreneurship world, just as success in the traditional entrepreneurship world, really comes down to execution. And that's really about the nuts and bolts, again, of sort of business operations. And that's, if you're a nonprofit, that's fundraising, that's program delivery, that's like, stewardship of your donors, right? Like the sort of the more boring stuff of running a business is really where things succeed or fail. Hiring the right people instilling the right organizational culture to make sure you're being, culturally competent with the users and beneficiaries you're trying to serve. Like, this is where organizations succeed or fail. It's not the original idea. And so that's where we think, potentially the sort of skill set of the business school can be really beneficial, which is really about sort of nailing some of those operational and strategic missions of an organization, because that's where we see a lot of folks fall short.
Okay, great. I want to encourage our audience, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any experience, please share. We'd love to hear from you. And then I'm wondering too, Will, have you ever worked with organizations, say nonprofits, that want to start a social enterprise? And and I guess when I say social enterprise, I'm talking about a business that will plow funds back into the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, certainly. And I think for the most part, again, this is part of our business school bias, right? Is that most of the nonprofits we work with, we encourage them to have some sort of earned income stream, to not be wholly dependent on philanthropy. And so the reasons for that are multiple. One is that, again, we just think it creates more sustainability. Two, as we know, sort of philanthropy can be fairly spotty in terms of follow through, and when it tends to be pretty cyclical with the sort of general financial environment, and we never know when a new World War III is going to break out, as it might have this morning. So being dependent on sort of the markets can be challenging, which is why we think having an earned income stream is really important. And so, again, I think a lot of times a nonprofit's first instinct when they want to start something that's going to make some money for them is to assume that what that means is they have to create a whole other organization that's going to be a for-profit holding company that's going to run the coffee shop or the youth training program or something like that. And I think increasingly a lot of that work and operation can stay within the sort of structure of the original nonprofit, and it's figuring out ways to sort of incorporate that into the sort of main operating entity. So I think oftentimes people go way too far into thinking that they have to start a separate business for that, when really this can just be a program offering they're doing. And again, the only rules there are, again, you're making sure that whatever profits are generated from this new business line are flowing back in the organization in ways that are IRS compliant. And so there's lots of ways to do that. And again, I think there's a couple of the most important thing is, again, thinking about avoiding mission creep. And nonprofits are just as guilty of this as for-profit businesses are. But even if you see a great money-making opportunity with sort of a subset of your core population, is that the core mission of your organization? Or is that going to sort of take away from what it is that made you the organization that you are, or why you started the organization? And again, I don't think that's always the case, that sometimes people are going to find themselves having to make some sort of trade-off, and that can be challenging. And trade-offs aren't inherently a bad thing, but I think it's important that people are cognizant of them, and thinking about, again, the core mission of the organization, whether or not this sort of business line is going to take away from that or strengthen it. So those are important things to think about. And again, ideally, it's a situation where we see this often with like workforce development organizations, for example, will then have, we'll train people in skills and then give them jobs to get them on their feet and ideally make some money back to the organization as well. And there are some fantastic organizations that really do a great job of that and really build into the comprehensive curriculum of the program. But if it's sort of an offshoot of sort of the core mission, that's where things can get a bit more complicated. So again, that's where it's really important to have a comprehensive, what we call theory of change, making sure that whatever the sort of business is that you're thinking about as an offshoot of your program really fits into your core theory of change as an organization.
It's interesting. I asked Mark Lane the same question. He mentioned theory of change before even your value proposition. I thought that was very interesting that here we are talking about social enterprise, and the very first thing top of mind was the theory of change, and then secondary was the value proposition. And I'm curious as to why that was top of mind for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because particularly for, I think this is, generally speaking, this is less true for nonprofits than it is for-profit social enterprises, but
Mm-hmm.
inherently there may be trade-offs, at least in the short run, between profits and impact. And if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a clear and like very comprehensive theory of change of what you're trying to do with this entity, it can get very blurry about like what decisions you make as an organization. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like, again, just like with any business, we'll have sort of key performance indicators or KPIs or, key things
Mm-hmm.
that they're measuring to make
Right.
sure that they're actually doing what they want to do in the world. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of the cornerstone of a social enterprise, we believe, is the theory of change, which is essentially a hypothesis about the world and what role your intervention is going to play in changing it. And so if you don't have someone to look back on and say, like, are we actually getting away from, we're trying to solve for problem X, Y, and Z by
Mm-hmm.
delivering intervention A, B, C, is adding this new focus going to take away from that? And again, if it is, you have to be cognizant about looking back at your theory of change and understanding why this is a good or a bad thing for your organization. And
Mm-hmm.
absent that, you're sort of just, floating around in the dark a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really just, think about it as sort of your key core operating principles as an organization. But really, like, as I said, it's a set of hypotheses about the change you're trying to create in the world. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the other thing too is, like, I think that doesn't necessarily mean that your theory of change is a static document. You might
Mm-hmm.
believe that by doing intervention X, you're going to achieve outcome Y, and then you're going to see like, actually, this isn't having the impact we thought it was going to have, but we started doing this other thing, and it was, creating way more positive social outcomes. So really, we should adjust our hypothesis to fit what we're seeing in the world. So those things can change.
Mm-hmm.
But they should be internalized as an organization so that you can be consistent looking back at that and making sure that you're still going down the path that you originally intended to.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. So I guess in summary, what are some of the lessons that you've learned in your journey working with social entrepreneurs?
Um, First of all, it's hard. I think entrepreneurship can be a lonely journey. Particularly social entrepreneurship can be a really lonely journey. And what we've seen, I think, at the margins, again, as I said earlier, like, um, ideas are not as important as execution first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be hurdles in the road. I think, you know, the media likes there's sort of this survivorship bias, right? Where only the organizations that do really well get talked about. And there's this impression that all entrepreneurs are always killing it and everything is always up and to the right,
Right.
everything's going great. But that's not the reality for anyone, and particularly for entrepreneurs. And so, like, sort of stick-to-itiveness and commitment is really essential to success in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And know that you're going to have ups and downs, and it's about sort of planning when things are going well, like, not just expanding at the expense of, future reserves and things of that nature, like, planning for the best and expecting the worst, or whatever the phrase is. Like, that's really important. But really, it's just that if you believe in something and you commit to it and you sort of
Mm-hmm.
persevere through the ups and downs, like, that's where you're going to have success. I think some of the most successful social entrepreneurs we've seen are folks
Mm-hmm.
who've, like, pivoted pretty significantly from whatever their original idea was, and the reason they were successful is because they persevered through challenges. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's really my main piece of advice, is that
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna be ups and downs. Like, be honest with your investors, with your supporters, etc. Yeah, I think we may have lost Valerie.
Yeah, yeah, I
Oh.
am so sorry. I hit the wrong button. I was trying to get a banner and somehow I clicked the button that kicked us out.
The joys of live TV, no problem.
Yes, yes, yes. The wonderful thing is this is going to be edited. Yeah, I was trying to get a banner so people could know what we're talking about. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been very, very helpful. And I guess one last question is if you're starting out, what advice would you give to those who are starting out, starting a social enterprise?
Yeah, again, I think we just talked quite a bit about theory of change, and I think that should be the grounding principle for your organization, is developing a comprehensive theory of change, and then go out and socialize that. Again, first of all, well, one of the other challenges we often see is that people have what we call the curse of knowledge problem, which is they spend a ton of time in a domain and they know everything about this specific problem.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they go out and talk to people, they assume everyone else has that exact same frame of reference that they do, and that's often not the case. And so being able to explain your organization why you do what you do and why it matters in like 30 seconds is incredibly
Yeah.
important. That's going to be like the founding principle for we call it the elevator pitch, but back before COVID, when we all went to networking events all the time and you're shaking someone's hand and exchanging business cards, like they should be able to look at your card and remember, oh, Will does this, this, and this. And then as I'm thinking about people I can connect you with, that's going to be like top of mind for me as an organization. So nailing that theory of change and then being able to distill it into a 30 to 60-second summary of why what you're doing is important, I think is critical. Is super important, is figuring that piece out. And then the other piece, again, we talked a little bit earlier about customer discovery, but go out and talk to people about what problem you're trying to solve, and really make sure that whatever problem you perceive to exist is one that dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of other people share as well, and care enough about that they're willing to spend money to solve for it. And again, I think there are sort of the inertia of the status quo is very powerful. And I think particularly in the social sector, right, where the status quo may be something that's delivered by the public sector or et cetera. And like there is certainly a slightly better way of doing it. But if it's not 10 times better than whatever it is people are used to, it's very hard to get people to switch into something new. And so make sure that whatever it is you're doing is 10 times better than whatever else is out there, or it's going to be very hard to get people to adopt whatever product or service you're trying to sell them.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. And then when you start your organizations and you find yourself, I guess, swimming upstream, because it sounds like your approach is a little bit different from, I guess, the approaches I learned when I started, working in nonprofits, about 20 some, maybe 30 years ago. Your approach is very, very different. Do you find that the nonprofits, and when I say nonprofits, I'm talking about 501c3s, do you find that they are often swimming upstream against a culture that's more, I guess, rigid, not quite as innovative as your entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think so. Within like the funding ecosystem, you mean? Like I'm a nonprofit trying to go talk to foundations and like what I'm doing doesn't quite fit the box. Yeah, I think there's some of that. But I think increasingly this is where we're seeing like the ecosystem go is towards this sort of blended model, and particularly having like earned income streams. So I think it's increasingly going in that direction. I think increasingly foundations are looking for organizations that are innovating in a lot of these spaces. So I think the funding landscape is shifting a little bit. That said, there are still, a host of problems with sort of the traditional grant making process for nonprofits. And I think that's always a challenge of having having many masters, so to speak, when it comes to all of your different sort of funding sources and trying to sort of tailor your pitch to all of those. And that's always a challenge. But that's where, again, having a core set of operating principles, which is your theory of change, that shouldn't change no matter who you're talking to, is so critical. Because again, as long as you can nail that and you have a compelling reason for existing, that should resonate with funders, no matter what their specific sort of program is that they're looking to make grants for. I think that translates across all organizations. But it's certainly a challenge. I think, again, the nonprofit space is there are millions of nonprofits out there, right? And there are a ton of organizations doing really good work. The challenge in the space, in my mind, has really been scaling and taking things that work and expanding on them, and finding ways to do it more efficiently. And we have all these organizations competing against one another for smaller and smaller pots of funding, right? And that's a challenge, which is one of the reasons why we believe that having earned income streams is so critical, because it can sort of provide some cushion for the organization, so that they're not so dependent on these grant cycles, right? So I think it's certainly a challenge. There's no question that running a nonprofit in this environment is hard, and who knows what, again, depends on the sort of macroeconomic environment too, as well, in terms of what support is out there for organizations. And we've seen just so much happening with COVID and with the markets, and it's been a crazy couple of years for everyone, but I think especially for nonprofits. One, because the need is greater than it's ever been, and two, just because there's been so much uncertainty from the public sector, from philanthropy, like from all these organizations. So it's certainly been a challenging couple of years, but that's why we believe that innovation is the way that organizations are going to survive and thrive, is because I don't think we're ever going back to the way things were. And so organizations always have to adapt and grow. And I think that sort of thinking about some of the tools of more traditional entrepreneurship applied to a nonprofit or a for-profit social venture is really the best way to do that.
Okay. Do you find that foundations are more likely to increase their impact investing in this environment?
Yeah, I think that is certainly a trend we're seeing. I think foundations, again, are large bureaucratic organizations, just like universities are, and so change can be slow. But certainly, we're seeing increased focus on this and desire for foundations to make more impact investments, in addition to, or perhaps even replacing some of their more traditional grant-making portfolios. And so, yeah, I think we're certainly seeing a lot more. And again, the reason why that's so important, right? Like, just taking a step back, the way foundations are constructed traditionally is that 95% of their endowment is in market rate investments, which probably are making the world a worse place, depending on what they're investing in. And then 5% of the endowment is going towards grant making, right? And increasingly, if your mission as a foundation is to be solving for these problems you see in the world, like, why not use the corpus of your endowment to solve for that too, through your investments? And so we're increasingly seeing organizations and foundations leading the charge on doing that. Certainly not all of them, but it's one that we're certainly beating the drum for, that more foundations should be doing more of this, and supporting social enterprises with their investment capital as well as with their grant capital. And so I think it's a trend. There's certainly a trend in that direction. We're certainly not all the way there yet, but I think that will continue going up and up in the years ahead. Okay,
awesome. All righty, so I'm going to open it up for questions one more time. We've got 3 minutes. If you have any questions, comments, or want to share some of your experiences with social enterprise, please feel free to post. All right, so Wil, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your wisdom. I am going to sign up for your email distribution list so that I can get information. And for our viewers, can you let us know how they might contact you?
Yeah, so if you look on just go to the Rustandy Center website, Rustandy Center for Social Sector Innovation. You'll find our information. You can contact us there and sign up for our mailing list. And my information as well is listed on the team page. My email is also just my first name dot last name at chicagobooth.edu. So feel free to send me an email directly as well.
Okay, awesome. All right, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So again, I want to say thank you to everybody who stopped through. You have really made this a very engaging session. We really, really appreciate your time. And again, Wil, we appreciate your time, your knowledge. It's totally invaluable. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All righty, so
take care.
All right, you too. Okay, bye-bye.